Hello there, my friends. My name is Hannah, and welcome to the third installment of Reading Impatiently in 2024. So, for those of you who haven't been here before, hi, welcome. 2024 is the year that I read impatiently. It is the year that I just pick up the fucking book that I want to read and read it, regardless of whether it fits in with a theme for a vlog that I might want to do, or because I might want to read that in the future to coincide with some future event. We're not doing that anymore. We are simply reading the books that we want to read at the time that we want to read them. It's revolutionary. So I'm recording this slightly early. I have, for the last 2 months, I've been recording a vlog where on the first day of the month, I sit down in front of my bookcase and I just pick 4 books that I want to read that month. They are not in any way to fulfill any kind of goal or obligation per se. They are just books that I fancy reading that month. And it's been going really well for me personally. And I've got to some books that I've been meaning to read for ages and haven't carved out the space for. And it's worked well. However, I've tweaked what I'm doing slightly, because last month I read an arc of a big book, a really big book. It was like 590 pages. And because I like to finish these vlogs within my 1 month window, and because, you know, I have a full-time job outside of prattling on about books on the internet, I don't want to pick any big books for these specific videos, at least at the moment, because I am about to go into a really busy 3-week period where I think in 3 weeks I am at home for five days, maybe 6 days, which, if you know me, is a lot more days than I like to be away from my home. So I've gone for some shorter books this month, but nevertheless they are still books that I'm super excited about. So the first one is actually incredibly impatient, because I only got my copy of this yesterday when I went to a book event with this author, and it is Pity by Andrew McMillan. Andrew McMillan is a poet that I really like. This is his first novel. It is it's about, from hearing him talk yesterday, this seems like it's sort of a bit of a love song to Barnsley, the town in South Yorkshire that he is from, but it's also grappling with the identity of places like former industrial towns. Barnsley was a former coal mining town. I live in Newcastle, which has a very similar heritage and history, and I'm just really looking forward to this. It also centers queer voices, and it includes a scene, or like a part of the book, where someone does a drag performance as Margaret Thatcher, and that is just a book that I am interested in. I'm so excited for this. He read a few excerpts of the book at the event yesterday, and they all sounded amazing. So that is number 1. And then the second one, actually another queer book, another Men Loving Men book, in fact. This is Christopher Isherwood's A Single Man. So I read Goodbye to Berlin last year by Christopher Isherwood, which is his sort of autofiction that's loosely the source material for the musical Cabaret. And I really loved his writing style. And I saw the film adaptation of this with Colin Firth and, was it Nicholas Hoult? Anyway, years ago, I saw it at the cinema whenever it first came out and loved it, but I can remember fuck all about it. So I'm really looking forward to picking this up. I have been wanting to balance, try and consciously balance in my reading some more classics alongside some more newer stuff. So I'm trying to get to these more. So when I said I wasn't doing any obligation reading, I was lying a little bit, but I genuinely do really want to read this book. So that's that. And then last month, in this video for February, which I actually only finished filming yesterday, I'm actually wearing the same fucking jumper that I was wearing when I wrapped up that video. I have washed, I promise. I read 2 books that were speculative fiction last month, and I really enjoyed them. They were the 2 books I think that I enjoyed the most of the 4 that I read last month. So I thought maybe I would lean a little bit more into that space. I seem to be gravitating a little bit more towards speculative and science fiction books than I previously have. So I'm just going with it. And this book, which has been tabbed to death by my friend Kenna, who gave it to me, this is a book that has been on my shelf for ages and I've been meaning to get to. And this is a classic one that I've been putting off because I thought, oh, well, I might do at some point a vlog where I read lots of books that are to do with time and time travel. I haven't done that. And last month I read a book that was about time travel, and now this month I'm also reading a book about time travel, and there you go, there's your link. They're not going to exist in the same vlog. But this is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Mohtar. This I don't know much about, but I think it is told from dual perspectives of 2 people who are on opposite sides of a time war. And I'm pretty sure it is queer in some way, because I'm pretty sure the queer book club that I'm in read this like before I joined. So that's what I know about this one. And then the final one is another sort of sci-fi adjacent book. Or even, is it just a sci-fi book? I don't know. We'll find out. But that is The Employees, a 22nd century workplace. Oh, I don't have a physical copy of it because I'm planning on reading the ebook. It's available on Everand, by Olga Ravn. This is a book that has been on my radar for a while because it was longlisted or shortlisted for the International Booker, I think a couple of years ago. Jen Campbell read it and loved it. I remember seeing her review on her channel. I couldn't remember if she loved it, but I spoke about this book in another video, and Jen did confirm that she did love this book, so few. But this, I think, is kind of like a bizarre sort of science fiction, like office drama. I don't know, but it's only really short, that one. I think it's like 136 pages. And yeah, that one again I am picking it up because I genuinely want to read it, but I am trying to read a book from every country participating in the Euros football championships this year, for reasons that are explained in a video that I will link down below. But yeah, so I am planning on reading this book for that challenge, but I'm also just really, really interested and curious about that. So those are the books. They are all, as you can see, quite slim numbers. So I'm hoping that I will be able to get to all of them quite soon. Last month, I didn't pick up any of the books after I filmed the intro for, I think, 2 weeks. And then I read all 4 books in the final 2 weeks of February. I'm going to try not to do that this month. But, you know, best intentions. Reading can be like that sometimes, can't it? I think you just have to go with it. Be flexible. Roll with it. So I'm going to go and remove all of these tabs now because that's going to drive me insane. And yeah, I will see you soon. I am going to London this weekend. Well, I'm going to London this week, actually. But I'll be in and around London, including my partner and I, for Christmas, bought each other a meal at Gautier in Soho, which is a vegan Michelin-starred restaurant. So I suspect the next thing that you see may be some delicious, hopefully, vegan food. Here's hoping. See you soon.
back of my
Hello, editing Hannah here. I realised in the next clip where I talk about the books, I didn't reference the B-roll that you're about to see. We did go to the fancy vegan restaurant, and it was really disappointing. For the price that we paid, we've been to a less expensive, not Michelin starred, but in the Michelin guide restaurant in Newcastle that isn't even a vegan restaurant, but does a vegan menu if you request it. And the food there was significantly better than what we had at Go To. So here is the food we had. It looks nice. It just wasn't that. It wasn't all that. And you'll see at the end where we went immediately, pretty much immediately after we left the restaurant.
so that's fine.
Hi, I am here with an update. I have read 2 of the books so far, and we're off to a very good start. These vlogs are officially becoming my favourite thing. I just seem to be having like such a lovely time with the books that I read. Like, amazing what happens, isn't it, when you actually read the books that you want to read and not ones that you feel you should read or you're going to read for like any other kind of external reason. Shocking, isn't it? But let's chat about them. So the first one I read was The Employees by Olga Ravn, which I pronounced incorrectly, I think, the first time I said her name, which is translated by Martin Aitken. And this is such an odd little fish. It's such a weird book. So it's told, the entire book is constructed from statements that are being made to some kind of corporate investigation body. So we are aboard the 6000 ship. We don't really know what the 6000 ship is, but we know that something has happened. There's been some kind of incident that is now being investigated by the higher ups. And so the entirety of the book are these witness statements, essentially, from the workers / residents who are on the ship. And those workers and residents broadly fall into 2 camps. We have humans and we have humanoids who I think are sort of like partially organic, but then have kind of some kind of like sci-fi add-ons to them. But there's 2 kinds of there's 2 kinds of being, essentially, and we don't know exactly what has happened, and we just are reading these series of statements, and the statements are all numbered, but it's the statement that is numbered, not the individual making the statement. So you never know who's saying what, and I definitely got the impression that there were multiple statements from the same person, but you don't know. And that's really interesting because I didn't really have a sense of scale of like how many people were involved in this. But yeah, so the crew at the start of the book, we find out that they've sort of found some objects on a planet that they visited recently that they've brought on board. And they're having some kind of effect, and they're affecting the humans and the humanoids slightly differently. And I couldn't really picture them. They're not kind of described in any kind of accessible way. Sometimes they're described almost like eggs, but then they seem to shift and be different things to different people. And the impact and the effect that they have on different individuals can vary from people just kind of wanting to be near them, or people feeling very protective of them, or people being kind of like weirded out by them and not wanting to be around them. And they seem to be the source of some kind of discontent or tension that's growing between the humans and the humanoids. And it's really interesting because when you're reading these witness statements, and some of them are really short, only a few sentences, and some are a couple of pages. The book itself is only like 136 pages or something, so it's not a long book. And I found myself, like, the first question I asked myself as soon as I got to a new statement was, is this a human or is this a humanoid? And it was such an interesting and confronting thing, because I was like, why does it matter? Why do I care? But it was like the first thing that my brain wanted to know was like, which side are you on? Who are you? And I was like, oh, that's clever. And I'm really uncomfortable with like how this book has like exposed some like wiring in my brain. In some ways, what Olga Ravn is exploring is not an unusual thing for this sort of genre of science fiction where you have AI or humanoids. It's asking questions about, you know, what is it that makes us human, and how do we know, how do we define the outer edges of humanity? But I do feel like she's exploring it in a really interesting way, because in things that I might liken this to, say something like Blade Runner, and there's some parts of the book that really did remind me of Blade Runner a lot, to do with the humanoids accusing corporate of implanting dreams in them to kind of control them. And then being like, well, I know that I shouldn't be dreaming because I'm not a human, and yeah. So stuff like that, it reminded me quite a lot of Blade Runner. But what was really interesting is how that exploration lands when you don't know any of the individuals and you can't get to know them. So because we don't know who anyone is, none of the statements have a name attached to them. So like I said, sometimes I felt like I'd heard that voice before, but I couldn't be sure. And so you can't rely on your natural ability to empathize with an individual to kind of hook you into the story. You had to find a way to empathize en masse with a kind of anonymous, homogenous group of people. And that's something that I think we find harder to do as human beings. So I thought it was like really, really clever. We're going to read you a little bit. There were lots of bits that I could have chosen. So this is taken from statement 31, which is quite early on. I should say there's like gaps in between the statements. So I'll go like statement 3, statement 4, statement 9, statement 12. So there are kind of gaps between them. And I think we go up to like 170 or something in the book. So this says, I've never not been employed. I was made for work. So this one, right from that's the start of the statement. We can tell straight away that this is one of the humanoids who are speaking in this one. I was made for work. I never had a childhood either, though I've tried to imagine one. My human co-worker sometimes talks about not wanting to work, and then he'll say something quite odd and rather silly. What is it he says now? There's more to a person than the work they do, or a person is more than just their work? Something like that. But what else could a person be? Where would your food come from? Who would keep you company? How would you get by without work and without your co-workers? Would you be left standing in a cupboard? I like him, this human co-worker of mine. His interface is impressive. I'm stronger than him and have more endurance, but sometimes he'll get an idea that means we can do our job in less than the designated time. He's got an incredible knack for streamlining, from which I gladly learn. I've become a lot better myself at seeing how a workflow can be adjusted so that the task at hand can be completed more efficiently. This has surprised me rather a lot because I've never known such improvements in my performance without an update being involved. Whenever we save time, I'm ready to move on to the next task straight away, but my co-worker always says, now let's sit for a bit. I'm not sure what he means by this, but I sit down with him all the same, sensing that I might offend him otherwise and jeopardise our excellent working relationship. Perhaps it's an old custom from before my time. It's not possible for me to continue our work on my own, so I hope you'll be kind enough to overlook the matter. And anyway, it's only about 15 minutes a day at the most that we sit for a bit. And I just thought that was so interesting, because what it does blend there, as the book builds towards the climax, it does get quite dramatic, but there's also this element of like the humdrum that I find really interesting. And obviously, like, it's very clear from that excerpt and the fact that it's called The Employees that she's also exploring kind of this relationship that humans have with utility and productivity, and how and why it might be problematic for us to put too much stock in those ideas. I don't know if this was intended or not, but I also found with some of the crew members who sort of had these sort of maternal, almost caregiving feelings towards the objects that had been recovered by the crew, it felt a bit like they were trying to like plug a maternal gap, because there's no children on board the ship. There is reference to hologram children that are kind of like, is a resource or a tool that's like used by, I think, the humans rather than the humanoids, to kind of plug the gap of like missing their children. Because the other thing that we don't know is where Earth is, what has happened to Earth, if anything has happened to Earth. And it didn't always seem clear whether Earth was still there and existing and these people had just made the decision to be on the 6000 ship, or whether like this is like, you know, where they had to be, like whether they had to evacuate the planet or whatever, we don't know. But yeah, there's no children on board, and so it also felt like the book, to me, it felt like the book was also exploring where those feelings and impulses to care and to procreate and to look after another being, where those feelings go when there isn't an obvious like beneficiary of those feelings. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely, she's got a new one out that I think is, so I'm recording this on Mother's Day, so the International Booker long list is going to be announced tomorrow, and I think her new one might be on that, in which case I will definitely try and get to it quicker than I got to this one, because I thought this was brilliant. And it's definitely like this flavour of sci-fi that I particularly like and respond to. So it did remind me, I've already mentioned Blade Runner, but it reminded me in some ways of Severance, definitely with the sort of looming corporate, just off the edges of the page, not quite able to access the information that we might want to know about that company. But then also it reminded me of Her, the film Her by Spike Jonze, and also in parts things like Ex Machina, and also things like Moon. So yeah, there's definitely like a style of sci-fi that's very kind of introspective. Arrival as well, it reminded me a little bit of Arrival, and those are all things that I really like, and this seems to like fit in there. They're all kind of like books that are sort of, well, books and films and pieces of media that are asking you who are humans when we take them out of context. And actually, context is a perfect place to start talking about the second book, which was Pity by Andrew McMillan. And I loved this. I feel like I need to stop saying this, particularly in these vlogs, but I think this could be one of my favourite books of the year. I absolutely loved this. I inhaled it. I read it in not quite one sitting because I had time constraints, but like I could have easily read. Actually, both of these books I could have easily read in one sitting. Yeah, this was absolutely fantastic. So, and the reason I say context is key is that that book is sort of, it's sort of a bit of a love letter to Barnsley, which is where Andrew McMillan is from, but a very eyes open and a very non-rose tinted glasses love letter to Barnsley. And we're looking at, it's a book that's quite fragmented, deliberately so, in the voices that you follow throughout the book, which creates this kind of really nice, almost like choral quality to it. And also I think it's not surprising that that was an approach that was taken by a poet who's kind of used to condensing ideas down into quite short, sharp bursts. So there's a few different lines that we're following throughout the book. So the first are two young men in their mid to late 20s called Simon and Ryan. They have just recently started dating. Simon is working in a call center in Barnsley as his day job, but then he's also a drag queen in the kind of like local pubs and clubs, and is sort of throughout the book gearing up to do a performance for the first time in the club in his local, like in his town, rather than like going out to the surrounding areas like Sheffield. And Ryan is working as a security guard in like the local shopping centre, but he's got ambitions to join the police force. Like he's a little bit obsessed with the idea of joining the police force. So that's sort of one generation that we're following. And then there is the generation above that. So Simon's dad, Alex, who used to be a miner, is struggling quite a lot with alcohol abuse and just seems to be in a very not good place. And we realise later on some of the reasons why that might be the case. But we do know that his wife, Simon's mum, left him quite a while ago, and he seems to be struggling still with that. And then his brother Brian, who was also a miner, and he is participating in like an community arts outreach project. So these academics have come to Barnsley and are sort of trying to do some community engagement work that is, I'm sure, incredibly well-meaning, as these things often are, but it also seems to not quite be in service of the people that are engaging with this project. But Brian is going, and he's trying his best to sort of be open-minded, but is becoming increasingly frustrated with some of the questions that are being asked, or some of the areas that the academics want to kind of pursue. And then so you get kind of parts that are told from all of their perspectives, plus a few bits that are interspersed. So we get these beautifully, like, the most poetic writing that is in this book, and obviously we would expect beautiful writing from a poet, but Andrew McMillan's poetry style, if you're familiar with it, is quite it's quite gutsy and it's quite sparse, but definitely I think the most sort of poetical language are in these interludes that are in italics throughout the book. And they are the day-to-day, they're describing like a day-to-day experience of the miners, but the generation above Alex and Brian, so their father's generation, who was a miner. And there was just like such beautiful language, like described so beautifully, and really kind of hauntingly. And when I got to the second one of those, I actually thought there was a misprint in the book, because I was like, oh, I've read this. I feel like I've read this before. But he deliberately uses like a lot of repetition throughout those sections, which really creates this kind of like onward kind of like bit of a slog throughout it, but it's like beautifully written. And that works really well when that is disrupted towards the end of the book. So we get those parts, and then we also get 3 other kinds of perspective throughout it. So we get field notes, which are summary notes from the academics, so the kind of outsiders, about some of the sessions that they've been having. And then we get 2 kinds of surveillance updates. So we get almost like a commentary of what CCTV is capturing, which links obviously to Ryan's job. And then we also get surveillance in the form of like this voiceless choral kind of like town gossip. So sometimes we're seeing a scene or an interaction from 3 different perspectives. So we might see it from like a normal narrative, like character sense, and then we might see it from CCTV, and then we might hear the gossip version of it. And I thought that was really, really interesting, because I think what Andrew McMillan is really tackling with or grappling with is this idea that nationally and internationally, I'm sure, we have a tendency to try and understand a place. We create a narrative about that place, and that narrative can be quite limiting in terms of it can't contain all of the nuance, otherwise it stops working as a narrative. But then if we don't have something to kind of latch our idea of a place onto, things can become quite muddy. So when I went to the talk that Andrew gave, he was talking a lot about after the EU referendum, when Barnsley, I think they had one of the highest percentages of leave votes in the UK, in the country. And he said it was really interesting because he wasn't living in Barnsley at the time, but he remembered being in and around kind of very progressive lefty types who, because of that, then started saying like really horrible things about Barnsley and the people who are from there, because they had this narrative now that, oh well, therefore they must be really xenophobic, or they must be really regressive, or they, you know. So it's like we're constantly creating these stories about a place. And what it felt like Andrew McMillan was trying to do in this book was capture more than one narrative. Because as soon as you say, well, we're going to tell the definitive story of a place, you automatically, by virtue, have to preclude a load of other versions of that story. And I think it was, he also talked about how, and this was really interesting, that in the American literary tradition, the idea of like a brilliant book being written, like a piece of literature being written about a small town that you would never visit, that you'll never go to, but the idea that there might be stories and lives that are worthy of great literature existing and happening in that town is kind of part of the American literary tradition in a way that it isn't really a part of the English, and he was very careful to specify the English literary tradition there, because I think it's not necessarily the case in Scotland or Wales or in Ireland. But I thought that was really interesting, and it was definitely him sort of trying to excavate this idea of a place through exploring the people there. And I just thought it was so cleverly done. And particularly, I think it was interesting. There were a few moments that stood out. So there was one, particularly in the scenes where Brian is participating in this community outreach project, and they keep trying to sort of get them to remember what Barnsley was like. And there's a part where they're sort of getting frustrated because it feels like they have an idea of, external people have an idea of the place. And if you reinforce that stereotype, you're just reinforcing the stereotype. But if you try to add nuance to it, they don't believe you. So there was just so much like tussling around these issues of wanting to like dredge up the past and like wanting to almost have the people in this group perform Barnsley for them, and not sort of trusting that actually they don't walk around every day talking about mining or talking about the things that have happened in the town, because most people just sort of go about just trying to live their lives as best they can. And one of the other things was around Simon's drag performance, which I thought this was brilliant. So the performance that he's doing, building towards to doing in the town like local club, is a Margaret Thatcher drag performance, and he's having a conversation with Ryan about it, and Ryan's like, isn't it a bit cliched though, like lad from Barnsley like doing Thatcher, and Simon was like, well, maybe, but no one else is doing it, so like it can't be a cliche because no one else is doing it. And so this idea of like, is there a way to talk about the past and offer new perspectives on it? Is there a way of sort of like honouring what has happened with respect, but also not allowing that to stop you from living in the moment? And then linked to that idea of sort of narratives and the stories of a place is this kind of theme running. There's so much through the book around surveillance, as you could probably tell with the kind of CCTV stuff, but also this idea of performativity and how we behave when we know we're being watched versus how we behave when we don't know we're being watched. And Simon has like an OnlyFans account that him and Ryan occasionally create content on together, but Simon's very comfortable having his face appear on that, but Ryan really isn't, and he gets really anxious about it because he's worried that his ambitions of joining the police force aren't going to come off if he's not in the closet, but he definitely seems like less comfortable. And there's like a moment where he's gone to see Simon perform in drag, and he's very happy to see him in drag, and then he's very happy to see him not in drag. But one time he comes out and Simon's just taken his makeup off really quickly, and he's still got like bits of eye makeup on around his face, and Ryan gets really uncomfortable with it, like because he's in this sort of middle ground where like Ryan gets really unsure about what it says about him, because he knows who he is when Simon's in drag, and he knows who he is when Simon's not in drag. But if he's in this middle place, he doesn't sort of know how to react. And there's all of the characters in one way or another are stuck between sort of trying to be authentic and feeling like they need to perform certain behaviors to meet the expectations of the people that they're encountering, whether that's family members or whether that's people coming into the town or whatever. And there was just like for a little book there was so much nuance in what was being explored. And I know that sounds like it might be a bit bitty, but I promise you it does hang together really well in a kind of one continuous narrative. I also really liked the way he plays with kind of layer and depth a lot. There's a lot of a link to the surveillance and the visibility stuff. There's a lot of things being excavated or uncovered, and obviously this is a book that is dealing with like the post-industrial reality of a town like Barnsley that has a very rich history of mining. And there was a bit where was I going to read for you? This is an excerpt from where he's describing like the day, like a daily life of someone working in the mines. And it says, the cage always is what he hates most, waiting for faces to emerge, narrow-eyed against the light, crowding together in a space no bigger than the floor of his shed. smelling the other men, their tiredness and their yearning for the weekend and their dreams and their one too many beers for a weeknight and their children and last night's tea, then the descent. He splashed his face before he left, but it still felt as though the night had hung itself to dry around his shoulders, the earth rising up around him through the bars, feeling like an animal, and then coming to a stop as sudden as slamming into a wall. A man like a shopkeeper in the morning, unlocking, letting them out, his pupils taking a while to adjust, waking up all over again, and then the walking. Headlamps pointing the way down the tunnels, no talking, a last intake of breath, grasping at what's left of the air from the surface, readying. At least out of the cage he could move more freely, kick out the stiffness from his knees, wind his shoulder in a slow circle, preparing it for the swinging, the picking, the breaking. Sometimes the noise of the belts and the drills was so loud it was like some beast come to life in the core of the earth, something massive and hungry clawing its way towards him. And like, yeah, I thought this was so brilliant. I feel like I could talk for so long. I mean, but about both of these books really, but particularly about this one. But I have been wanging on for quite a while now, so I'm gonna refrain. But you will probably be hearing me talk about this book more as the year goes on, because yeah, I can't believe how much he packed into this. But then, like I said, I'm not surprised at how much he packed into it, because poets are very adept at packing things in, aren't they? So there we go. That's those two books. I'm gonna have, it's not gonna be much of a disruption for you, but I'm gonna pause now. Had a really good time with those first two. It's Sunday. On Tuesday I go to London. I've got a day in London, and then I go to Paris, partly for work and partly not for work. But I've got a long weekend in Paris. So I'm going to do like a whole separate vlog for that. And yeah, I will see you when I'm back and have read the final two books. Tatty bye.
You're gonna deglove it entirely. Well done. My rhubarb, get out of there, Lewin. Okay, buddy, are you done? Can we go inside and get dry? Lewin.
Hello. It's been a while. For me, not for you. I feel like that's become a cliche in these vlogs. I need to stop doing it. But it genuinely has. I feel like I haven't spoken to you in this video in ages. But I have finished my next book. I've been to Paris, read a whole load of other stuff that was nothing to do with this vlog, and the video for that is up on my channel now if you want to go check it out. But yeah, I've read This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Mohtar. Let's get into it. So I really, really liked the concept of this book. So this is a sort of enemies to lovers romance book. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Hannah, you don't really read romance except for that Sarah J Maas series that we will not be discussing on this channel anymore. But it's sort of, but it is an enemies to lovers romance in a way, but it's done in quite a literary way, and it's also a piece of science fiction. So this is about two women called Red and Blue. Not their real names, but we know them as Red and Blue. And they are on opposite sides of a time war. And they are both sort of very well-respected, very elite agents at what they do for their respective camps. And so their paths start crossing, and they start leaving. One, Blue, leaves a letter for Red one day, kind of like a taunt. And then they start leaving letters for each other all over the place, like all over space and time. And they slowly fall in love with each other, basically. And that's not ideal when you are fighting a cosmic war. And that's sort of the setup. And I was here for that. I liked it. And I loved that they were told through, majority of the book is told through these letters. And I just think, like, is there a more perfect vehicle for sapphic longing than the letter? I don't think so. I don't think so. So it's great because they sort of fall in love with each other, but they're always kind of chasing after each other, and they don't actually exist together in physical space. So it's a very sort of intellectual romance that they have. This is not based on sort of physical chemistry or things like that. This is a sort of meeting of the minds sort of romance, which I liked. And so Red is fighting for an organization or a world, it's unclear, called the Agency. And she appears to have sort of some kind of biomechanics, some kind of augmentation, bits of chrome and things. Basically her world is very like techy, very like classic futuristic sci-fi, bit matrixy. And then Blue is fighting for a side called the Garden, who are much more sort of, they've got a lot more of organic sort of stuff, and they sort of grow things slowly over time. But both of them have kind of like these elite levels of technology that enable cross-world and cross-time travel. So they're the sort of worlds, but it is very much about Red and Blue. So you kind of see these flashes of this wider war and this wider conflict and the kind of universe that the story is taking place in. But you only kind of get it in these sorts of flashes and bits and pieces. The language that they use to describe the time travel is that they're moving up and down threads. So almost if you imagine like space and time as being like a tapestry. And basically what Red and Blue are trying to do, at least at the start of the book, is go back in time and meddle around and stuff far enough downstream that it will no longer, like the conditions for the opposite party to exist will no longer be there. So essentially like going back in time in order to make something not exist anymore. And that's kind of stated from like the first page of the book. So the stakes are really high. Essentially what they are each trying to do is make it impossible for that person's world to exist by going into the past and changing things. And so it's very high concept. And I did struggle. I really struggled at the start because I'm not a very, I don't know, like I'm not a seasoned sci-fi reader. I often feel like I don't have the skills sometimes to pass information, particularly like in the setup of a book, and work out what's genuinely useful for world building and what's the information I really need to retain and what's kind of just there for colour. Because there were a few moments, I'll share some examples, where bits felt like they were just there for like, oh, we're just filling you in on something here, and that I was holding in my head going, okay, remember that, and that just didn't come off, and I didn't actually need to remember it. And particularly right at the start of the book, I was reading it being like, kind of like groaning a bit internally, being like, oh no, this is such a bad book for Hannah Lost the Plot. Like, I am not going to cope. But actually, I was wrong, because really it is all about red and blue, and actually they don't really explain too much about the world and the mechanics and how things are actually possible. It's all about red and blue, and I sort of don't know how I feel about that, because on the one hand, I like the idea that you're getting like a slice of a conflict through these two individuals, and I do think it would have been overwhelming and definitely not possible in a book of this size to kind of go into the backstories of the worlds. But so I get it on the one hand, but then when you don't explain much or anything really, everything can start to feel really convenient. So like, I don't know how they time travel, other than it being described as them jumping on a thread. I don't know how they do it. Yeah, you can go up there. Okay, good boy. Yeah, Luna. You're fat, oh, darling, you're okay. Where's it? Oh no, there you go. There you go. Yeah, you're just gonna go up there? Okay. His pillows were not in the right place. Abused boy. What was I saying? Yeah, like the mechanisms just weren't sort of explained, and that's kind of okay in one sense. But so the letters that they leave for each other are not like written on paper letters, because they eventually end up sort of even the fact that they communicate with each other in this way is treasonous, really. So like they obviously have to like disguise the letters. So it will be things like Blue writes a letter inside a sumac seed that Red bites into and reads the letter. And I'm like, okay, like on the one hand, if that was in a piece of poetry, I would be like, cool, interesting imagery, nice. But also, because you don't understand how any of these things are actually done, and because we're not really meeting people who aren't red and blue, there's no sense of, for me, I felt like there was no sense of how exceptional they were or weren't, because presumably if everyone can leave that sort of letter and read that sort of letter, then what they're doing is still really dangerous. But if they can't, then how come red and blue can? And I don't know, I found myself like asking quite a lot of questions that ended up not being answered. But then there would also be like bits, let me find a bit, where I was given information that for the life of me, I can't work out why I was being given in a book this size. So Red puzzles through a labyrinth of bones. Other pilgrims wander here in saffron robes or homespun brown. Sandals shuffle over rocks and high winds whistle around cave corners. Ask the pilgrims how the labyrinth came to be, and they offer answers varied as their sins. Giants made it, this one claimed, before the gods slew the giants, then abandoned earth to its fate at mortal hands. And and then it goes on with like other possible kind of like folklore behind it. But for the life of me, I can't work out how the pilgrims or the labyrinth were relevant to the story. So it's like, so I'd get like, you'd get like, they give you information over here, but not the information that you actually might want or need. And I was wondering if that was, because I was reading it going like, I appreciate it on a lot of levels, but I'm not enjoying it. Why am I not enjoying it? And at first I thought it was that. I thought it was something to do with the information flow and what we were being told and not told. But then I was kind of reflecting and I'm like, I don't think that's what it is. And I think I've hit the nail on the head with why this didn't particularly work for me. And I think it's to do with the writing style. A lot of this book is written in really short sentences, and it's got this really like percussive rhythm that kind of like rattles along. And because we're covering so much time, literally, and like distance in this narrative that's already been really condensed, I personally just felt like, for me, a slightly more fluid and languid prose would have helped me like settle into the story a little bit more. I felt like I was being bombarded quite a lot. Let me give you an example of what I mean. I've written a page number down. Where is it? Yeah, okay. So, London next. The same day, month, year, but one strand over. So the strands are like, imagine it like being like possible worlds. So there's all these different worlds that exist where various things have or haven't happened because of tampering. So it's kind of like the multi-world philosophy thing. Anyway, London next. The same day, month, year, but one strand over is the kind of London other Londoners dream. Sepia-tinted skies strung with dirigibles, the viciousness of empire acknowledged only as a rosy backdrop glow, redolent of spice and petalled sugar, mannered as a novel, filthy only where story requires it, all meat pies and monarchy. This is a place Blue loves and hates herself for loving. Now, there's a lot in there, the individual images and the kind of moments that I like, but there's something in the rhythm of how it's written. Lots of short sentences, then colon, list, that I just found really like kind of distancing, and I was struggling to retain the information. Or even, not even retain, sometimes just access the information that was in the sentence because of how the sentence was constructed. And I've got no idea because I haven't read anything by either of these authors before, and I don't know what their collaborative writing process was like. But for me, it did feel like sometimes there were two voices trying to control a sentence, and that sometimes two versions of that sentence had just been slammed into each other and created this like slightly distorting thing. And thematically, I get it. I think it sort of works with what they're doing, but just for me and how I read, I didn't enjoy it. So that I think was one of the main reasons that I kind of didn't love it, while I can appreciate what it was doing. And I think it was clever, and that there was like a lot going on, and the themes were interesting because you basically got these two worlds where in the agency they've lost their sort of sense of connection with nature, and obviously in the garden they've got a huge connection with nature, but they struggle to sort of understand individuality because everything is so enmeshed in this organic system. And so it's asking questions about, you know, as humans, we kind of need this balance of both, and what happens if we try and create a space to flourish outside of those two extremes. And I get it. But I just couldn't quite enjoy it, although there were bits that were really sad, and there is like high stakes, there's betrayal, there's like stuff happens. And I think lots of people will and can and do love this book. It just wasn't one for me. And I also did see the twist coming, which I was surprised at, given how much I'd struggled to follow what was actually going on, which makes me think maybe it wasn't a twist, and maybe I was supposed to know all along that that's what was going on, and I just didn't twig. So who knows? But yeah, I liked it. But I won't be, I'm glad I read it. I think it was doing some cool stuff. I think if you are a sci-fi reader and you're interested in reading something that is a bit more like literary and more kind of person-centered, then I think it's worth checking out. But it's not going to be a favorite of mine. And then I have started reading A Single Man, which I am pleased to say so far is way more my speed. Way more my speed. I'm really enjoying it. I can remember almost nothing about the film, which I'm really glad about. All I could remember was that the main character is a university professor, and so I haven't spoiled anything for myself, and I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, I might actually finish. I might finish that today too, but I wanted to catch up about this while it was still relatively fresh in my head, because I don't think much of this is going to stick around for very long. So I may be back in touch again in this outfit, maybe even in this spot when I finish A Single Man. But yeah. For now, here's some footage of Lewin being really cute on a sofa. So we replaced a sofa that was in our bay window because I gave it to my brother who's just moved up here. And Lewin has been very suspicious of this sofa, but he's finally accepting it. And then see if you can spot from the couple of clips at what point the boiler serviceman arrived to service my boiler today. I can't even tell. Yes, we are wonky, aren't we? Hi, welcome to the floor. I have finished A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. I'm going to apologise now. I'm so tired. I don't know why. I've had so much sleep, but I'm so tired. But I really want to talk to you about this book. I did actually finish it yesterday, which is when I recorded the last clip, but I didn't have words, and I barely have words today, so bear with me. I really liked this. I thought I would, having enjoyed Goodbye to Berlin, and I preferred this actually to Goodbye to Berlin. It felt more complete, which is not surprising because I think Goodbye to Berlin was sort of not originally conceived as like a whole book, but it was like a collection of writings. Anyway, that's not the book I'm talking about. I'm talking about this. This is about a man named George. It's actually one day in George's life, so it follows one block of 24 hours. So in that way, it reminded me quite a lot of I've recently read in the Paris vlog that I mentioned before. I read The Birthday Party by Laura Mavinier, which was on the International Book Along list last year. And that's also like a very condensed time period, although this is a much shorter book. But yeah, so we're following George over a day in his life. He is a British man working in America. He's been in California for a very long time. He's a university lecturer in literature. His live-in partner, Jim, has died in an accident. I couldn't quite work out how recently, but like not super recently, but also he's very much still grieving for Jim. And we are just sort of going through the day with him, and I'm aware that doesn't sound super interesting, but I really love books like that, and I really liked this. I think it was written beautifully. I really like Christopher Isherwood's writing. He kind of is he writes very beautiful lyrical prose sometimes, but he's also got this like kind of Truman Capote quippy social commentary kind of like sort of barb to some of his writing. Right, let me start this whole bit again. I've been on a little ramble there. Let me try and do it again. So I really like the way he writes about grief, and the way he writes about grief is very bound up in the way he writes about George's sense of self and identity throughout the book. We see George construct for himself these layers of personhood throughout the day. And there is a lot in there, as there was actually in Andrew McMillan's book, about performativity and kind of putting on masks to present yourself in certain ways. So the very first opening bit is, waking up begins with saying am and now. That which has awoken then lies for a while staring up at the ceiling and down into itself until it has recognized I, and therefore deduced I am now. Here comes next, and is at least negatively reassuring, because here, this morning, is where it had expected to find itself, what's called at home. But now isn't simply now. Now is also a cold reminder, one whole day later than yesterday, 1 year later than last year. Every now is labelled with its date, rendering all past nows obsolete until later or sooner, perhaps, no, not perhaps, quite certainly, it will come. And that sounds very kind of like out there. And there's those flashes of that sort of quite philosophical prose throughout it, but it really worked for me. I thought it was so good, and it is linked, as I said before, to how he talks about grief. So then a couple of pages later, I'm going to read you another chunk, because really I think this book I feel like I won't do justice in my current state. I'm just going to read you bits. So this is like a couple of pages later. Think of two people living together day after day, year after year, in this small space, standing elbow to elbow, cooking at the same small stove, squeezing past each other on the narrow stairs, shaving in front of the same small bathroom mirror, constantly jogging, jostling, bumping against each other's bodies by mistake or on purpose, sensually, aggressively, awkwardly, impatiently, in rage or in love. Think what deep, though invisible, tracks they must leave everywhere behind them. The doorway into the kitchen has been built too narrow. Two people in a hurry with plates of food in their hands are apt to keep colliding here. And it is here nearly every morning that George, having reached the bottom of the stairs, has this sensation of suddenly finding himself on an abrupt, brutally broken off, jagged edge, as though the track had disappeared down a landslide. It is here that he stops short and knows with a sick newness, almost as though it were for the first time, Jim is dead. Is dead. And So we are dealing with his grief for his partner George, and that is a very complex grief. Because this is set in the early 60s, and Jim and George were not out as a queer couple. They lived together. People had their suspicions, or some people had their suspicions, that they were a queer couple, but they weren't out. And so George isn't able to grieve publicly for the loss of Jim. And in fact, he hasn't even told his neighbours that Jim is dead. He's told them that he's still out in Ohio with family because something's gone on over there, because as far as the neighbours are concerned, they are great friends and live in sort of roommates. And I thought that was really, really hard to read. And there are a number of instances throughout this day that we're following George on, where he is trying to work out who is seeing him for what he genuinely is and who isn't, and what is the threat to him at any of those moments. And I think that links so well with this idea of having this sort of fragmented, layered identity. And then in the background of all of this, the book is set in the sort of aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we also have, as well as George dealing with his grief, he's dealing, or sort of people at large are dealing with this, we could have nearly been wiped off the face of the earth in a nuclear event. And so there's this very personal grief and loss in this single man's grief, and also this sort of vague sense of unease in the people around them, of not quite being able to grapple with how close they may or may not have come to losing lives. And I think that's why the title of the book is so clever, because it works on so many levels, because you can take it that it's a single man out of the many who would have lost their lives in something like that. It is a single man in the sense that society perceive him as being a single man, even though he was in a relationship, but his relationship is not seen as valid to them. He is a single man and yet not a single man, because throughout the book we see him present many different versions of himself, even right down to, at his core with that opening passage, not even being sure always of his like fundamental like existential like identity. And I loved it. This is not it's not like The Birthday Party in the sense that it is not all ramping up to this sort of crescendo. I'm conscious that if you're watching this video, you might not have seen that video, but essentially that is like a very slow, drawn out book taking place over 24 hours that comes to like a height of drama. This isn't. This is a day in the life of this one man, and in many ways it was an ordinary day, and in many ways it was also an extraordinary day, because every day that we get to live and breathe is an extraordinary day. The book's not as twee as I just made it sound, but I really liked it. I need to read more of Christopher Isherwood's stuff, and I really want to go and rewatch the film now, because this wasn't quite what I was vaguely remembering. Bits of the film came back to me as I was watching it. Tom Ford, who directed that film, and who sadly for me has never quite hit the heights of, that was his debut film, and I've not liked any film that he's done as much as I liked A Single Man. And he writes a little introduction to this book. But yeah, I really loved that film, and Tom Ford is as well as being a writer and a director, is a fashion designer, as some of you probably know. Like, Tom Ford as a brand, it is the same person. And so I remember loving the visuals of the film so much, and I could really see how he had got those visuals from this book, and I don't know what else to tell you, gang. I really liked it. So once again, it's been a successful time. I really have been enjoying these little vlogs of picking 4 books just that I fancy, and I think on the whole I've had another really good time with them. I think if I were to rank them, it would be, it's so close, but it would be Pity, then A Single Man, then The Employees, and then a little bit of a gap, and then This Is How You Lose, The Time War. But I think there was a lot to admire in all of the books. I'm trying to think, can I on the top of my head come up with something that unites them all? You tell me. You tell me. You've heard me talk about them. What do you think unites them all? Because I'm struggling to come up with something that isn't just like really so broad and vague. Like, who are we fundamentally at our core? Because I mean, at their core, all great books are sort of asking that question, aren't they? I'm not sure I'll get away with that as a uniting theme. But yeah, thank you for hanging out with me once again. If you are new here, I hope you have enjoyed these ramblings about books. I will be doing more of these once a month, so do hit subscribe and come along. Why not? Thanks, guys. Bye.